The following is an encore presentation of stories from the Dooralong Transformation Centre. 13 minutes past 10 on this very wet Wednesday morning here on Rima Central Coast. As we were saying just before the 10 o'clock news, our guest this morning is Karen, who's been at Dooralong. How long was it for, Karen?
3.5 months.
3.5 months. Mm-hmm. Tell us about your life before Dooralong.
My life before Dooralong. So it's 49 years of life. Mm-hmm. I came from an alcoholic home. Mm-hmm. I grew up feeling that I was alone and isolated, and that one day things would change for me when I got older, and not knowing to me that I'd also had the disease, I like to call it, of alcoholism. So when I picked up that first drink, it was like a light had turned on for me. I felt that I belonged and that I could fit into the world, and that the world wasn't going to cause me any more pain. So I became very reliant on it very early.
So it gave you what you thought was acceptance. It enabled you to sort of function in a social situation, and
definitely.
Yeah, you said it's like a light went on.
A light went on because I felt confident for the first time. I felt that I wasn't alienated from society. Before, I used to think that I lived in, it was like looking at the world through a bubble, and not knowing how I was going to fit into the world because my life at home had been so chaotic. I was raised by my grandparents, and they came from old school values, and so there was a big contradiction and lots of secrets at home. So yeah.
So life wasn't happy at home, and drink provided you with that sort of feeling of acceptance.
That's right, and I'd been through abuse when I was younger as well, so there was a lot of pain that was bubbling up inside of me. And so instead of getting angry at the outside world, I was angry at myself. I thought I was a defect.
Yeah. And just a heads up for our listeners, you probably have picked up on what Karen said already, that we will be talking about some adult issues. So if you've got any little ones there that you would prefer not to hear some of those things, then, put your hands over their ears now. Okay. So this was an unhappy childhood. You've turned to drink. You say a light went on, but you must have been, what am I trying to say politely? Most people, when they have a drink, and that's fine, and they know when to stop. It sounded as if it was more of a problem for you there.
Definitely, because as soon as I picked up a drink, and also later on drugs, once I started, I wasn't able to stop, and that was the difference between me and other people, that I had no control over how long that period would last and how long I could manage it. It took over my life.
So there was nothing in your mind or in your head that was saying things like, Karen, you've had enough, you're going to have a hangover tomorrow, you're going to regret this?
No. And even the next day, it was, even if I had been in trouble or I'd got home late because I was still I'd gone back to live with my mother and my stepfather, it was worth getting in trouble, and I'd promise, this time it's going to be different. I promise. But as I said, as soon as I picked up a drink, I was unable to control my behaviour.
We've spoken to lots of girls and lots of guys from Dooralong who they said at this stage of the problems that you're talking about, they would tell themselves that they had it under control, that they could stop if they wanted to. Was that the same for you?
I don't think I ever felt that I had control over it. I don't think, I can't really look back on my life and say, well, no, when I've picked up that it's been controllable. I think that I haven't allowed it. I felt that I tried to control it, and the more I tried to control it on my own, the more guilt and shame that I would feel.
So you knew then that you couldn't control it, did
you?
So therefore that it must have been a problem. Did you reach out and say, look, please somebody help me, I've got a problem here?
Definitely. I reached out to the Salvation Army when I was younger in Sydney at William Booth, and they helped me a lot there, and they gave me a place to call home because I was very lost as well, and I went through their program there, and I learned about, I'd had a belief in a higher power, in God. I'd gone to church when I was younger, into Anglican church, and they taught me about a living God, I guess, and about that if I had acceptance of a power higher than myself, that I would change and have a place to call home.
Yeah.
And while I was with them, I stayed and I worked as a receptionist there. But I soon I got into a relationship and ended up having children, and that sort of I ended up leaving that sort of safe environment and into a relationship that probably wasn't, looking back, something that was very healthy for me, because it was like having an adult child that I had to look after, and I was very much of a nurturer, and I ended up staying with that person for 17 years.
And when you look back over those 17 years, what sort of relationship would you describe it as?
A very needy relationship. I had 5 children, but I've had 6 children. I had a child that died, and I found that I went into a great depression after that. And I also had postnatal depression as well. And because I was still hadn't dealt with my childhood issues to the best of my ability and had no support because I was by myself, and with a person that was probably dealing with their own things, was very self-centered in their own way and not committed to the family in the way that I felt that they should have been. I felt very alone trying to balance 5 children under 7 and the death of a child.
Wow, there's a lot on your plate, isn't there? There are those issues from your childhood which have, at this stage of your life, hadn't been resolved. There are unresolved issues with your partner and the sort of the needy relationship there. You've had the death of a child, and you have another 5 children.
Yes.
That's a lot going on for you, Karen.
It was, and then I got very sick a month after, and I was in hospital, and I was fighting for my own life. And I remember pleading with God. I wanted to bargain for the life of my child. I couldn't believe that she had died, and that I was facing death myself, but I ended up living. So there was a guilt associated with that as well.
Yeah, why did I live, my baby die?
Yeah, exactly, where she was an innocent child. So there was a lot of self-doubt and also, guilt and shame associated with that.
Yeah. And how did you say you were in that relationship for 17 years?
Yes.
You were still taking alcohol during those 17 years? Cause you
on
said
and off.
Yeah, because you've already been to William Booth once.
That's right. So I knew, but when I did drink on and off, it was about reaching oblivion. But I did have my children when they were younger, and I did have a dedication to those children, especially when they were younger, to be able to look after them and to make sure that they were fed and looked after properly.
So to some extent, at this stage of your life, during those 17 years, although the alcohol was there, it wasn't being abused to the extent that it was earlier, because your children are there and you want to be a good mum.
Yeah, there was it would be once every now and then, but when I did drink, it was very out of control, but I made sure that there was somebody around to be able to manage the children at that time.
But things too could turn for the worse, obviously, because you're at Dooralong. So what happened?
Well, there was a combination of a lot of events, and so the 17-year relationship had broken up, as my partner of that time had found somebody else at work. So I became very angry, and I couldn't believe that I'd placed myself into that situation. I ended up taking drugs.
You're blaming yourself now for the infidelity of your husband?
Yes, so I had a lot of that. Yes, exactly. A lot of blame on myself. And I fell into addiction. I sought help after about a year. My children slowly started leaving and started living with their dad. And so I sought help, thinking that I would take the children back. I got involved in another relationship that again was abusive, but this time it was not just mental, it was physical abuse as well.
So there was domestic violence now.
Yeah, and then that person isolated me from my family. The little that I had, my mother had died. There was no one around. But I did have my sister and my brother and my dad at that time. He's now passed away. But that person had told me that these people weren't healthy for me, and it ended up that he put me into hospital and said that if I tried to leave him, he was going to hurt my children. He would go after my children. So, and
when you say him just passing there, he put me into hospital. He attacked you.
He attacked me. He strangled me, and I passed out, and I woke up with the ambulance drivers there. This was overseas too, in England, so I had no support, and I wasn't able to come back to Australia. When I did end up coming back to Australia, he told me if I didn't try to get back into England, that he would come back over, find my children, and there would be problems for my children, and I became very frightened.
And this, I'm guessing now, but tell me if I'm right or wrong, this is where you sort of turned to your usual sort of medicine, which was, or self-medication, which was
definitely, because a children's father in all this had said that. So when I came back, I tried to get back into England. They arrested me. They put me into lockup and sent me back. So I had a good excuse to get away from this person. When I was over here, the children's father told me that he was dying from cancer, but he wasn't, because he wanted me to take the children. I had no money or any ability to do that, and also the other person had been saying, as I said, that he was going to hurt the children, so I ended up drinking and running away.
Gee, Karen, there's enough there for half a dozen lives, and it's all happening to you. And it's no joke, it really did happen. It must have been. I wonder how you managed to keep going.
I don't know, but I'm just very grateful. I'm not a hard or a nasty person. I never had seen it as a way of lashing it back at people. Probably the thing that I've done is hide within drugs and alcohol. But in that, I ended up getting sober for a period of time, for 5 years actually, before coming into Dooralong this time, because I knew that if I could go and study, if I could get myself sober, study, I could reconnect with my children, but also make money to get away from from this person. Yeah.
So if we start looking at things from a little more sort of through a sort of positive lens now, you are at Dooralong.
Yes.
How come?
So for 5 years I was clean and sober and working. I'd studied, as I said, I have diplomas in drug and alcohol and also graphic design, and halfway through a criminology degree. I had my own place. My father had passed away. I had some money and I started having things. And
you were rebuilding your life.
I was rebuilding my life. My son had come to live with me in Sydney, but I still feel that I was desperately lonely, and I was trying to fill myself with all this external stuff and not dealing with those issues that had plagued me.
All those issues, yeah. So you sort of repress those.
I repress them
with stuff
and doing, like, constantly, which I don't mind, helping people, but not taking the time to look at myself. And then when I did go to a counsellor, they did some regression therapy on me, which I did, and it didn't go very well for me, and I ended up having nightmares. And next thing you know, I thought, it would be, somebody said to me, maybe after all this time you might be able to drink socially and have a great life. And I thought, well, okay,
maybe. And is that a cliche alert? It was at the beginning of a slippery slope.
It was a terrible slippery slope, because I wasn't working within drug and alcohol, but I was working. I was working as an intake officer in a youth service, and then
you above everybody should have known the risks.
I did. I knew all the knowledge, but I didn't put it into action in my own life, and that's, I think, one of the things that I've learned is that knowledge is one thing, but it's a practical application of it that's really important.
So you took that one drink, thinking, I could have one social drink, and then at some stage, it went to another drink and then another drink.
That night,
straight away it went to another drink and another drink.
Yes.
And how long was it from that episode to reaching out and saying, Dooralong, can you help me?
5.5 months.
And very terrible.
And by the end of it, my son, he'd already had emotional problems due to his stuff that I won't go into, but so he came to me and I tried to fix him. There was all this fixing going on, making up for the time of not being with him. So when I started drinking, at first he was like, no, don't do that. And he was okay. And he tried to help me. He tried to put me into detox, which I went, and I'd come out, and then he started getting angry, like putting holes through the doors and stuff like that. There was lots of things going on at home, him yelling at me, and he was just very frustrated with how it was going. I'd go into detox, I'd come out, and I'd go, no, I've got this, only to find that I hadn't. But it just progressively got worse, that I started unable to go to work, drinking from the morning to night and in the middle of the night, to the last 2 weeks before I came into, there was police involvement. I got sectioned and totally isolated. And before I went into Dooralong, I thank God, the person next to me, I'd had a very lovely relationship with the Salvation Army and the people at William Booth and at Dooralong I had known, and they helped me get in there. And pretty much my next door neighbour saved my life by reaching out for me, because the doctor said to me, the psychiatrist said to me, you're going to die by misadventure, by your own hand, because I tried to throw myself off the balcony in front of the police.
Wow. And at that point, and that was probably earlier this year we're talking, are we?
Yeah, that's this year. This year.
Just before you sort of took the advice and ran Dooralong.
Well, I ran out of options. I would love to say that it was my idea, but it wasn't. Everything was taken away from me because I wasn't taking the signs. Everything had fallen away. I had no money left. I had my son, he hated me, and my children that had, my two older boys that had never spoken to me had started talking to me. They never want to see me again, ever.
Everything was stripped away.
Everything was stripped away, that I had no other choice but to do something, or to make that choice of just dying.
Yeah. And it was in that desperate situation that you thought, there's a choice here, death or Dooralong.
Yeah, and 2 weeks before I came, I honestly, and this is not an exaggeration, I couldn't even shower. I couldn't go to the toilet. I couldn't keep food down. I was very unwell, and I had a friend that helped me, and I stayed there. I got into another toxic situation, but that's okay. They helped. It was all the process that needed to happen for me to end up here.
Well, we're glad that you did. Very glad that you did.
I am too.
We're going to break for some more music, and then we're going to come back and see what growth has taken place with Karen during the last 3.5 months, because the person she's just been describing there doesn't look anything like the person that I'm looking at now, who's sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It's hard to reconcile what she's just been telling us with the reality of the moment. So ours just ticked over. It's now 25 to 11. We're talking to Karen this morning. Karen's explained her journey to Dooralong and has been there now for the last 3.5 months. And what's happened for you?
Oh, what hasn't happened for me? I think, where do I start? I came in there and I was crying.
Broken.
I was broken. I couldn't believe that my life had turned out, that I had all this stuff, and then all of a sudden they're not there anymore. And I'm talking about people, places, and things, material stuff. Everything had gone. And I was so frightened. And with all that knowledge, I was still so very, very frightened. I was so frightened that I couldn't even hold a pen, And
just to remind listeners, you talked about your knowledge. You used to work in a drug and alcohol sort of counselling industry, if you like. So
that's right.
So yeah. But even with all that knowledge, you are scared.
No, and the first thing that happened is when I got there, I met Andrea, and Lyndall came up and spoke to me, and a support worker by the name of Rebecca, and they were just so kind to me. And do you know what, when you're feeling like that and somebody just is kind for no reason, and they just look at you and they put their hand on you and they go, you're going to be okay, and here's your house, and here's your little room, and we're going to look after you, and you go, goodness, thank God, and that's how it's been for me. I've found that, and I'm not just saying this, the people that work there have been a blessing to me. They've helped me to grow and to become not the person they want me to be, but the person that I'm meant to be. And that in itself is such a relief, because you can I've put up a lot of trying to keep everybody happy and all this sort of stuff, and to have somebody say, oh, you're just okay being Karen.
Yeah.
I'm going, whoa.
And we're not going into it now, but all those issues that you were talking about from you going all the way back to your childhood, they are issues that have they have resurfaced and they're being dealt with sort of properly in that safe environment, are they?
And I think one of the main things is that they're no longer an excuse for my bad behaviour. And I say that because though I didn't choose to be an alcoholic or an addict, if I pick up again, I'm choosing a life that I know will have really negative consequences for myself and those around me. And now I just have to do the work because I don't want to be the same person that came in.
No.
And go out exactly the same things.
Well, it's called the Dooralong Transformation Centre. You want to be transformed.
Exactly. And I'm lucky. I've got great peers around me that have helped me by just being kind. There was a person that I'd known from when I was a caseworker. She was in the laundry and she came and gave me a blanket and she said, here's a blanket and you might remember me, but something along that you'd been nice or whatever that I remember you. And she gave me a blanket and I cried.
What would you say is the biggest difference between the old Karen and the new Karen?
I have hope.
Hope? Yeah, we can underestimate it, can't we? But if you haven't got hope, then what else is there?
That's exactly right. And grace. I've been given another shot at life and I'm very lucky about that. I'm blessed.
So from God having stripped everything away from you, because that's the only way he could get through to you, he's now replacing it, not replacing it, but filling your life with healthy things, healthy relationships.
Healthy relationships with myself, with my environment and the people around me. And I think maybe putting things into proportion and not looking at what I can get from the world, but what I can give to the world.
And we've mentioned God a few times, and you said that you you sought out the Salvation Army because you had a beautiful relationship with them going back to your childhood. What about God? What about the first chapel night? How's all that spirituality sitting with you?
I cried and I was very anxious. I had a lot of anxiety. Because I don't know if I felt good enough to be in chapel, and I felt that I'd been given a lot, that I'd thrown it back into God's face. I thought the Salvation Army's face.
Yeah. You now know that everybody's good enough.
Yeah, that's right.
But you had that concern that perhaps you weren't deserving of his grace and his favour.
And I'm not the best God person, to be quite honest. Like, I'm not the person that you come to for chapel night, just saying that, or on chapel on Sunday. But
I don't think it works like that. I don't think you have to be the best God person.
No, but I do have a faith.
Person. Yeah.
I have faith.
So you'll be going out to the one of the Salvo's local churches on a Sunday?
I do. I go out to Bonnells Bay. I have been out to Tuggerah Lakes, and I've also been out to Long Jetty, so I've done a bit of a tour.
But your favourite of those is the Bonnells Bay one?
Okay, yes, it is. Is that correct?
What makes that good? What makes it a good church for you?
Do you know why? I think because it's about not the words, it's about their actions, and it's about the actions of people when they're kind to you and they look you in the eye and they smile at you and they see you as a person.
And they don't judge you. They don't say, there's
judgment.
Karen, the former drug addict or the former alcoholic.
No, nobody
it's
says
just,
that.
there's Karen.
No, and the lady said to me, who I have no idea who it was, she said, "You're looking very lovely today." And I thought, oh, that's really nice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Building
these things.
you up.
And I listen. I hear through people God, if that makes sense. When hear the word of God, like last week about the light, we're talking about that. That's really interesting to me. So I crochet, so I'm not distracted, and I listen.
Excellent. We'll have some more music. We'll come back and see. Well, we'll talk to Karen about what she hopes the future might have in store for her, although it's entirely up to God. 11, we're talking to Karen, who's been at Dooralong for the last 3.5 months, and they must be doing something great out there, because the person Karen was describing before she got to Dooralong looks or sounds nothing like the Karen I'm looking at now. So, as Karen was telling us just before the music, things have been going well for her. Not naive enough to think that she's there yet, but feels that she's on the right pathway.
I think about taking life on life's terms. I think that that's probably one of the biggest gifts that I've been given, and about accepting each day as it comes. And there's been some really hard days.
Of course.
Really hard.
You've had some sort of, hard knocks. You've had some, what do we call them? We call them challenges now. You've had lots of challenges in your life, and they've got to be dealt with. But you're in a safe place.
Definitely, and really great people around me, and I'm very, very blessed, to be quite honest. And I use that word because it's not of my own doing. It's the doing of other people that have come into my life that have made my life feel that it's worthwhile.
Yeah, and those people have just been faithful to God and done what God has asked of them, and God has asked them to be good to you.
Yeah, they have. And then by that, I end up being good to myself, which helps me to be good to other people, and that brings me a lot of joy.
Yeah. So I'm guessing, I don't know, but you probably, having only been there for 3 months, you've probably got another 3 months at least, haven't you? So if you've made this much progress in 3 months, the person that we see in 3 months from now, wow.
Thank you. I don't know. I just now I'm in level 2, so about giving back to the community as well as to society and to the staff.
Yeah.
Trying to do the best that I can and take direction.
Yeah.
I think that with that, I'll be led into the right place that I'm meant to be.
A couple of issues to finish with. Firstly, you've talked about family and having 5 children. And you were saying that's been a difficult relationship over the years. Is it still difficult? Are bridges having to be rebuilt, or is it still all a little bit up in the air?
Well, I have 4 boys and 1 girl. The 2 older boys are independent and live. I'm not sure if they'll ever speak to me again, but do you know what? I pray for them every night.
Good. And
I give thanks for them, and I remember them for who they are. And life has been difficult for them, so I know they're on their own journey.
Okay.
My 18-year-old, he is speaking to me again. I spoke to him yesterday, and he wasn't going to speak to me ever again.
Oh, there you go.
And the 2 younger ones, they're I haven't really heard a lot from them, but they have taken a little bit of a step back and said, Mum, we'll just see how you go. And I get that.
Yeah, and that's perhaps as much as you can ask for them. They've got to see for themselves.
That's right. But my son, who was very, very angry, he said to me yesterday he's going to try to get into the army. Now, last year he said was told that he had too many. He needed to go out and experience the world, and he was smoking and all this sort of stuff. He had to get he's stopped smoking. He's now got himself fit. He's reapplied for the army. So, good things come out of sometimes bad places.
So we'll leave those relationships in the hands of God.
Exactly.
Career-wise, you were halfway through a degree, so that's pretty good. Degree in criminology.
A degree in criminology, yeah.
You hope to be able to go back to that?
Yeah, I'm going to go back to that in November when the term starts again.
Super.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to that, and then see what happens from there on after.
Yeah. And finally, how would you describe your relationship with God?
We have a work in progress.
I think we all do. I think it's always, even on our deathbed, it's probably a work in progress.
A work in progress, and probably I need to stop talking so much and listening a little bit more, but, I think that, he's my friend. He's my friend, and I'm not, as I said, some days I just go, oh, the God thing really, it doesn't annoy me. I just don't get a lot of the things, but when I see it and I reflect at the end of the night, I can sleep with a clear conscience, and that's for I'm grateful.
Yeah, and we are grateful that he has led you to Dooralong.
Thank you.
And we trust him that he will lead you out of Dooralong and into a productive and sort of healthy future.
Thank you very much.
Give our love to everybody back at Dooralong. I hope the roads are still open for you with all this wet weather.
You might have to stay here.
Yeah, you may have to stay here. That's right. We've got no laundry that we can give you.
Have you got food?
Yeah, we can manage a little bit of
cool.
food. Okay. Okay, thanks very much, Karen. You've been listening to an Encore presentation of the Dooralong stories, which can be heard live every Wednesday at 10 a.m. and repeated 8 p.m. Sunday and 1 a.m. Wednesday, right here on 94.9 rema.cc.